Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost 3 years ago, the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and told us that she would fight against a number of burning injustices. And after almost 3 years, let's see how she's done. She told us that if you're born poor, you will die on average 9 years earlier than others. And last year, researchers from Imperial College found that children from lower socio-economic backgrounds are 2.5 times more likely to die before they reach adulthood than their peers from affluent families. And we know that the government are not addressing these inequalities. The Fabian Society found that the government now provides more support through benefits and tax reliefs to the richest fifth of non-retired households than to the poorest fifth. And the IFS estimated that more than 5 million children will be living in poverty by 2022. The Prime Minister told us that if you're black, you're treated more harshly by the criminal justice system than if you're white. In 1718, there were 3 stop and searches for every 1,000 white people, compared with 29 stop and searches for every 1,000 black people, and black people were over 3 times as likely to be arrested as white people. The Prime Minister said that if you're white, working-class boy, you're less likely than anybody else in Britain to go to university. And the Higher Education Statistics Agency data shows that the number of white boys attending university fell by almost 8,000 between 14-15 and 17-18. And earlier this year, a National Education Opportunities Network report found that more than half of England's universities have fewer than 5% of white students in their intakes from a lower socio-economic background. And as well as raising tuition fees as part of their coalition with the Liberal Democrats, since 2010 the government has decided to provide more financial support for the richest 20% of households than the poorest 20%, according to research by the Fabian Society. And the Prime Minister told us that if you're at state school, you're less likely to reach the top professions than if you're educated privately. And only about 6% of the UK school population attend private schools, and the families accessing private education are highly concentrated among the affluent. But those who did attend make up 51% of leading journalists, 74% of judges, almost 30% of members of Parliament, and 70% of the current Conservative leadership candidates. Attainment earlier on in life is also unequal. In 2018, the proportion of private school students achieving A stars and AS at A level was 48%, compared with a national average of 26%, and while at GCSEs, an A or grade 7 or above, the respective figures were 63% and 23%. The Prime Minister told us that if you're a woman, you will earn less than a man. In the Cabinet Office, where the Government Equalities Office sits, there is a reported pay gap of 10.7% in favour of men. This is a higher gender pay gap than the public administration sector average, but it is not alone among government departments. BEIS is at 14%, the Department for Exiting the EU is 14.5%, and DCMS is 22.9%. In 2019, the BBC found that fewer than half the UK's biggest employers have narrowed their gender pay gap. And the Prime Minister told us that if you suffer from mental health problems, there's not enough help to hand. A Public Accounts Committee report from earlier this year found that children and young people are being turned away from NHS services because their condition is not considered severe enough to warrant access to overstretched services. This is due to the lack of trained mental health professionals. There are only 4.5 psychiatrists per 100,000 young people, and even those with serious mental health problems are being turned away because Britain has one of the lowest numbers of hospital beds in Europe for young people struggling with such problems. And the Prime Minister told us that if you're young, you'll find it harder than ever before to own your own home. And wages have not kept pace with property costs. The IFS found that about 40% of young adults cannot afford to buy one of the cheapest homes in their area, even with a 10% deposit. And meanwhile, 1.7 million private rented households are paying more than a third of their income in rent, making it harder than ever to save. And to make matters worse, an estimated 150,000 homes for social rent have been lost between 2013 and 2018 because of this government's failure to address a broken housing system. These are all things the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead told us she would address in her first statement as Prime Minister. Yet almost 3 years later, it is clear to me that she has failed to achieve her mission. Instead, she has supported the powerful, she has prioritised the wealthy, and she has entrenched the advantages of the fortunate few. And I hope that the next Prime Minister will do more than just talk about injustices and actually match policy to rhetoric. Thank you.